In the late 19th century, only a few of Earth's most inhospitable regions remained uncharted by humankind: the Arctic, the Antarctic, and the infamous Northwest Passage. The world's greatest explorers had tried and failed to tame these frozen frontiers. The vast, forbidding expanses around northern Greenland held a unique allure, attracting daring expeditions and sealing the fate of many. In 1881, driven by the desire for national glory, the U.S. Congress approved a perilous Arctic mission, led by Lieutenant Adolphus Greely. A war-hardened Civil War officer, Greely was a man of courage and unwavering discipline, but he had no Arctic experience, a lack the military didn't view as a hindrance. Their mission? Establish a research station, document scientific data, and most ambitiously, claim the title of Farthest North from the British. On July 7, 1881, Greely and his crew of 25 boarded the Proteus in St. John's, Newfoundland. They headed for Lady Franklin Bay, a remote Arctic outpost at the edge of civilization, 600 miles from the nearest settlement. With them, they brought 350 tons of food and supplies, enough for a 2-year stay. On arrival, they built their research station, Fort Conger, a lone beacon against the icy, endless wasteland around them. In the months that followed, the men undertook day-long excursions, documenting breathtaking but desolate landscapes, frozen fjords, hidden lakes, and ghostly Inuit villages. It was both beautiful and haunting, yet their spirits remained high. Greely led his team with a focus on discovery, keeping morale high even as Arctic winter approached. By mid-October, the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving them in total darkness for 137 days. For Thanksgiving, the men organized a field day, races across the ice, a rifle contest, prizes of preserved peaches and rum. Despite the bleak isolation, camaraderie held them together. As spring returned in March of 1882, the men were ready to venture northward. Greely split his team into 2 groups, led by Dr. Octave Pavey and Lieutenant James Lockwood. They were tasked with setting a new record for Farthest North, their journeys layered with equal parts ambition and danger. Dr. Pavey's team encountered a dense ice pack, forcing them to turn back, but Lockwood's group pressed on, battling temperatures plunging to -52 degrees Fahrenheit. They set a world record, reaching 83 degrees 23 in, closer to the North Pole than any human before them. The men celebrated their victory with anticipation. The promised resupply ship, Neptune, was due any day to bring fresh provisions and letters from home. But the Arctic is as treacherous as it is breathtaking. The Neptune, hindered by thick ice in the Kennedy Channel, could not reach Fort Conger. Instead, it left supplies at Cape Sabine, 240 miles south, a distance no one could realistically cross so late in the season. As the Neptune turned back, it left Greely and his men on the brink of a dark new phase of their expedition. Months passed, and the expected resupply ship failed to arrive. Morale cracked. Dr. Pavey, growing frustrated, refused to renew his contract, insisting he'd stay only for medical duties. Greely, enraged, threatened him with a court-martial, viewing Pavey's refusal as desertion. As tempers flared, so too did the creeping dread among the men, the realization that they might not be rescued at all. By the time August arrived, Greely had no choice but to accept that Neptune would not return. However, they had one last contingency plan: head south to Cape Sabine, where they might find the supplies left by the Neptune. But the journey would be perilous. With their provisions dwindling, the men abandoned Fort Conger in small boats and set out southward, a grueling journey across the harshest Arctic terrain. On August 25th, they arrived on Washington Irving Island, the halfway point to Cape Sabine. Their hopes soared when they discovered a cache of supplies, only to realize the food had long spoiled, left by an English expedition years before. Pressing on with meager rations, each day brought them closer to starvation. By September 10th, the boats became trapped in an ice floe. Forced to abandon them, the men camped on the frozen sheet, hoping it would drift toward Cape Sabine. The men battled constant hunger and freezing winds, clinging to the slim hope of rescue. They could hardly know that their only resupply ship, Proteus, had met with disaster. In the United States, news of the Proteus's sinking threw the public into a frenzy, each outlet publishing dire speculations about Greely's fate. Despite this uproar, the military and Navy did nothing, claiming they could not risk another mission until winter passed. Back in Massachusetts, Greely's wife, Henrietta, wrote letters to the military, pleading with them to save her husband and his men. She received only a curt reply stating no rescue was currently planned. The crew's situation grew more desperate as they drifted through the Arctic. After 51 days on the ice floe, fate finally intervened, pushing them to solid ground south of Cape Sabine at a place called Eskimo Point. While it wasn't their intended destination, they were back on land, but Cape Sabine, and their last chance at survival, was still several miles away. This story of survival was only beginning. The worst of the Arctic winter was yet to come, and the men had little idea of the horrors that awaited them. The Greely expedition had defied death before, but now, stranded and starving, they faced their bleakest hour. In a desperate stroke of luck, the crew drifted near Cape Sabine, where they discovered a place to make camp. There, Adolphus Greely ordered a team to hike further north to search for critical supplies left by the ships Proteus and Neptune. But when the men returned, they bore only grim messages. Proteus had sunk, along with its supplies, and Neptune had delivered only a fraction of the expected rations. Their supplies would barely last a few weeks. With Arctic winter fast approaching, Greely ordered the team to Cape Sabine, hoping to eke out survival until spring, when hunting might sustain them. But rations dwindled quickly, and by October, the men were scraping by on only crumbs. Dog biscuits, old leather straps, anything remotely edible became a lifeline. Starvation clawed at their minds, and desperation drove some to raid even the smallest caches. Back home, Greely's wife Henrietta took to the press, rallying public outcry to demand a rescue. Her pleas spread across the nation, forcing government officials to finally begin preparations. But as funding was argued in the Senate, the men in the Arctic suffered. In January 1884, Sergeant William Cross became the first to succumb to malnutrition and disease. Dr. Octave Pavey inspected each man daily, watching for telltale signs of illness, but it was hopeless. A single palm-sized ration became their daily sustenance, and they began netting shrimp so tiny it took 1,500 of them to fill a cup. The cold was relentless. In March, an alcohol lamp leaked toxic fumes into the shelter, choking the men. They stumbled outside in the sub-zero night, frostbite claiming more flesh as they fought for air. In the confusion, one crew member, Charles Henry, stole a strip of bacon from their ration. But the theft quickly surfaced when he vomited it up, and from then on, he was watched with wary eyes. By April, hunger and despair were rampant. 2 more men died, and Greely ordered yet another journey in search of the elusive caches, entrusting the mission to George Rice and the cook. George, however, was weak, and tragically died during the journey. The cook returned empty-handed, and back at camp, more men succumbed to starvation. Frederick Kislingbury, an old friend of Greely's, finally broke. Haunted by memories of his wife's death and his shattered friendship with Greely, he descended into what the men described as baby talk, retreating entirely into himself. Meanwhile, morale was nearing collapse. Then, as April drew to a close, the world shifted in their favor. Though they didn't know it yet, a rescue party had left New York. The Arctic grew colder, and rations finally ran dry in early May. Charles was caught stealing again, this time drinking moonshine, and Greely had had enough. He warned that any more thefts would be punishable by death. But Charles continued his reckless thefts, and Greely kept his word, executing him the next day. The survivors, hollowed out by starvation, buried Charles in the snow. More men perished, their bodies left outside as the surviving few were too weak to dig graves. By June, there were only 7 left. They chewed moss, wax, even animal droppings for the smallest relief from hunger. And then, when all hope seemed lost, light finally pierced the darkness. On July 22nd, while the men lay in the shelter awaiting death, the sound of canvas tearing broke the silence. Sunlight poured in as rescuers looked down upon the dying men. Greely raised his head and whispered, "Here we are, dying like men." Another survivor could only murmur a plea to let him pass in peace. The rescuers hurried to carry the survivors to safety, while others began gathering the bodies of the fallen. When they departed on June 23, 1884, the survivors were so frail they were mere hours from death. One of them, Joseph Ellison, had suffered severe frostbite, and emergency surgery was performed to amputate his legs. Yet, sadly, he passed away from complications before they reached St. John's. When the surviving members arrived home, they were hailed as heroes, but rumors soon overshadowed their triumphant return. Reports of cannibalism spread. Frederick Kislingbury's body, exhumed after burial, revealed chilling evidence. Despite the freezing temperatures, his limbs and torso appeared disturbingly skeletal. Cuts on his bones suggested he had been carved with precision, not torn by animals, but dissected with a blade. This horrific discovery ignited rumors that the group had split into factions, fighting over the scant resources left. Greely's faction allegedly hoarded food, condemning the outcasts to die. Autopsies of other bodies revealed similar wounds, but the survivors vehemently denied any acts of cannibalism, insisting they had done nothing dishonorable. The stories of their harrowing survival and rumored dark deeds quickly spread. Congress eventually awarded Greely the Medal of Honor, but the specter of cannibalism lingered. The legend of the Greely Expedition became a chilling reminder of the Arctic's unforgiving might, and the terrifying choices it forces upon those who dare to confront it.